Welcome, everybody. You know, it's October. It is the month, and we start easing into Halloween. And then we start getting into the Day of the Dead, which actually goes for a few days down in Mexico. But this is all about celebration of life. And so, of course, you know, Lea Brovedani, the Soul Journey Doula, is here. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about some of those rituals and customs and cultural ways of celebrating life when someone's passing on. I can talk a little about some of the Native American cultures, like in the Mimbres region of Southwest New Mexico, actually keep their loved ones that have passed inside their home until there's a certain point, and then they crack something over their skull and they escape out of there. So they have,
I'm
it's like
hoping
a,
that it isn't until they quit smelling, because that'd be kind of gross.
yeah, but it is kind of, there's actually, if you go to Silver City, New Mexico, in the University of New Mexico museum, they have one of the best Mimbres pottery collections in the world. But they have like a recreated like hut slash home, and you can see where the person they have a section in their home just for those who have passed on. So
Yeah.
I know you lived in India, and I was wondering about that too, because isn't that a whole celebration of the Ganges River and people going out and like kind of the funeral pyre, basically?
Yeah. And there's India has a lot of different religions. So it depends on the
Oh yeah.
religion and what they're celebrating. So they might not all do that, but definitely taking the body, and a lot of times they will actually have a processional. Kind of, it reminded me a little bit of the processionals we can have following a hearse or whatever, but this a lot of times there. And I apologize to any of my friends from India if I've got it wrong. You'll call and let me know. They'll let me know. But from what I understand, they'll do a processional, and then they'll have the fire pier set up,
Mm.
mount the body, and then people will actually be there to watch it. And
Yes, that's what I've seen. Yeah, I think you're dead on right. It's just getting the right, religious belief, because everybody's like, oh, it's Hindu and Muslim, but there's so many different religions and cultures within that. When we lived in Kenya and South Africa, people just go, oh, you're black or white or Dutch. And it's like, nope.
no,
Nope, that's not how it is, you
no.
know?
One of my colleagues, who was in the emotional intelligence field, was from Africa, and um, she was like Catholic Protestant person, and she considered herself African. So it really, like
It's
there's
and that's the thing. Everyone's got their thing, and it's about respecting it, right? So, yeah, as a death doula, that's something interesting. So you have to, sit with your clients and say, what are your beliefs? How do you want to move on? And I wonder how it's getting now. How much of the cultural traditions are we doing anymore?
Well, some things have changed. I mean, you look at, and I was thinking, I'd love to see, and this particular session has made me wonder, how have our beliefs changed and the rituals changed? Because part of the reason that they didn't do as many rituals was the plague. There was they before the plague happened in Europe, they used to wash the body, present it, they'd have everybody over, and then they realized that doing that could quite possibly kill them. So a lot of times they didn't, bodies were just dumped into mass graves and everything. Well, you look at what happened with COVID,
Mm.
and it prevented a lot of people from having the same kind of rituals and ceremonies and the funerals that we were used to. And I know from my personal experience, my mother didn't die of COVID, but she died during COVID. So we couldn't have a funeral. We
Mm.
couldn't do any of the rituals. None of us were allowed to, my brothers, fortunately, were allowed to be there. But you have to look at circumstances and how they've changed some of the rituals that we have. But I think it's really important
Hmm.
to have a ritual when someone passes, just to kind of release. It helps to
It's
relieve
closure.
some of the grief. And
Mm.
you know, grief is love. It's just an example of, when someone dies, you still love them and you grieve. And sometimes the rituals help the people who are left behind.
Yeah, it's interesting. A friend of mine, I mean, I don't know, people die every time I go to talk to you the day before. It's not you.
Kind of
It's
scary.
not
We're
you.
gonna have to quit talking.
I know, no, 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 no. But it's just, I'm at that age where it's starting to happen. I mean, Chris Christopherson passed away. I mean, come on, that's the worst thing on the planet.
I didn't realize how old he was.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, Nancy's devastated. Nancy's beside herself. She can't get past that. And she met him. And
Oh,
she was, taking animals around wildlife and doing educational things. And it was a Hollywood celebrity thing. And he came up to her and this is what she said, "Hey, little lady." And she's like, "Oh."
oh, Chris.
And she did meet Glenn Campbell, but that's a whole other story.
Oh.
That you'll have to talk to her in person next time we see you.
Is it a good
But
story?
going back to these rituals, a friend, her dad had just passed, and I actually just saw it last night, and she was like remembering her dad, and her dad had dementia, so she had basically realized that she didn't have her dad, so she had already kind of grieved before that. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
he's not the same, and it's not. So she put up a photo that she's used before of her and her dad, and it's so cute, and they were having fun, and he loved these different sports things, and he really loved cheap beer and watching sports and wearing crazy hats. And so that was their thing. And so that's what her mom and her are doing. Like, I think they did it yesterday, actually, when we were talking. They said, "Hey, we're going to have a memorial, but this is what it is. We're drinking cheap beer. Come get a hug." And that's what we're doing. That's his
Oh, I
memorial
love
because he's
that.
been
But
gone for a
that's
while.
honoring him. Yeah,
That's honoring. So a ritual can go with that, can't it? With the individual.
absolutely. Absolutely. You know, like you're honoring the person. And so having, you know, can you imagine trying to do a really formal um funeral for someone who like drinking cheap beers and wearing silly hats? It's just a disconnect. So
Yeah.
you do what honors the person. And you and
Yeah.
I have talked about, like, we'll talk about this during Halloween. Some of the strange things that happen when a person passed. There's so many things that you can try and explain them away to make it sound logical, but there's a lot of things that happen that make you realize that the world is a lot more complex and a lot more interesting than most people would have you believe.
Okay, now you got my eyebrows up. Now, what's going on? Seriously, come on, I want to hear. Because
Well,
there's also like we also believe that we have like alien humans, right? So there's a whole other belief system. No, I got your eyebrows out.
yeah,
I
yeah.
just did. I got him. So there's like this other culture of that we're in these multiple consciousness realms between alien and human, and we're all actually connected, and people just have a hard time believing that. I'm still like on this.
Yeah,
It's
I'm still
interesting.
having, you know.
I've been rabbit holing on this a little bit, going, this is some interesting stuff.
But
Because
here's a few things that a friend of mine, like talking about strange things. So a friend of mine, um, one of the relatives had died, and they're French. Their last name was Renard. And
Mhm.
that day that he passed, a fox came up to the door and looked in. Now, the French name for a fox is renard.
That's weird.
So, you know, you
Oh,
could
it's
say,
called
well,
synchronicities, right?
yeah. You know, and I told you, I think I've told you the story about the fellow, a friend of mine who's a doula, who was with a family, and he was from, I can't remember what tribe he was from in the United States, but he had a lot of bear totems around his house.
Okay.
And when he passed, they were after he had died, and the doula was sitting in the living room with all of the relatives who had come to gather around him and be with him when he passed. They were sitting in the front room, and a black bear came up onto the deck, walked up to the window and stood there, didn't try and get in, didn't try and do anything, stood there for 5 minutes, and then just turned around and walked into the woods.
See, mm,
So like there's, and like I have so many stories that I've gathered like that from friends who are doulas. So even if we don't do a ritual, I wonder if, and it doesn't happen all the time, but there's all kinds of rituals that seem to happen to honor the person's passing because we
so
are
yeah,
connected in the world.
that's what I was trying to say. And the alien thing freaks people up, but I mean, come on. Like there's other planets and why wouldn't there be beings? Come on, it's more fun to believe in it anyway. But
Yeah.
there's different consciousnesses, right? So we are, like you said in the beginning here, we're as humans kind of limiting ourselves all the time. Like the world is big
Yeah.
and we do share this consciousness that I believe that we don't always see because we keep closed eyes to it. But then when it's there and it presents itself really strong, you're like, ooh, that's weird. But maybe it's just not weird. Maybe it's just these daily things that we just stay close to until we're in a more we're in that state of, I don't know, just in a different state when you're in grief or someone's passing. I
And
wonder
I
about that.
can tell you that when you are in a room and a person has passed, the energy in the room changes. All of a
Hmm.
sudden, like you almost have to experience it to be able to describe it, but there is a change in
And the energy.
everything, in the energy, and you can all of a sudden, like, you can walk into the room and you can feel, even when the person is there, you can still feel their presence.
Mm. So I wonder if these animals were there to take the spirit with them and saying, okay, now that you've got your family there, now you're comfortable, even though medically from our personal side, it's like, okay, the person's done, is transitioned, but maybe the animal's there as a symbol of, okay, I've transitioned, here I am. Or maybe it's like a guardian. It could be a family member that's you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like we don't, I mean, I just think there's so much more than what we know, and we should always just keep an open mind to it because why not? It's more fun that way. But like, the bear could be it could be a relative as a bear in a way appearing as bear to the family. In other words, going, this is family group, we're bears, he's a bear, I'm taking him home, to the
Yeah.
next place or in the next adventure. It's like, the buses come to pick you up.
Yeah. That the
you know
spirit box. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, come on. I mean, so there's the animal realm. I mean, the fox one too. That's kind of like, that's interesting. That sounds, yeah. So there's other things, no matter what you do, that are going to be part of it, whether you,
Yeah.
hmm
And I do think that I know that when I was with my father, when he was dying, um, just telling him, because he was unconscious, and they say that hearing is the last thing to go, but that whole thing of reassuring him, because I know he was worried about my mom and who would take care of her, and saying, Dad, don't worry, we're all going to look
hmm
out for Mom. It's okay. It's okay if you go. And I know so many people who have said that until the person was almost given permission by the family, and that's part of a ritual too, it's okay. You can move to the next place, wherever that is, like, and there's
mm,
some people who say, nope, that's it. When you die, it's totally finished. You're like back to the earth. There's nothing else happening.
mm.
I'm not sure what I believe. I kind of think that, is it we're stepping through a door? Are we just into a different reality? Or are we
mm.
into, I don't know.
It's kind of interesting because these life events happen, weddings, babies being born and baptized, you know, all of these really significant life events have an energy that you
Yeah.
can't say it doesn't exist. That energy is there. You can feel it, you know it, and everyone's going to have a different, um, vibe on it. You know what I mean? Everyone's going to have a different perception of it, but you can feel it, and everyone's going to feel it at a different level depending on their openness to feel it, right? Some people feel it heavy. When we lived in the cabin in the mountains in Julian, and we had all this ghost activity, we really did have a ton. And a friend of ours is a psychic medium, and I mean, she sees things. And I watched her. I took her on a road trip to a haunted place, and she picked up something else, and her body moved as though she was pregnant. Like she suddenly had a It was weird. Okay, I know it's going to get weird now, Lee, but there's weird stuff. But when she came into our cabin, she literally shrunk. Now, she didn't physically shrink, but something visually shrunk her. She went, "Ooh, no, You've got kids doing things, and things happen in this cabin." And it was an offshore gambling hall for the mafia that we were living in.
Oh,
So,
wow.
oh yeah, yeah. And so, I mean, Nancy even had a blue like face come up over her in bed at night. She drew it, showed it to the landlord, because that's what you do. You stay in these little cabins till you find a house, which at that point is hard. She takes it and shows it to, because she's an artist. He looks at it and he goes, "Holy cow, that's my dad, 100%." Now, we've never seen his dad, and he's buried like 10 feet away from the cabin. We're like, "Well, thank you." So,
Wow.
and was also an Indian crossing ground. And then he had beds from during the Civil War, uh, the wires, under the bed. He had those, and he used those for chicken coops. And I think there was all kinds of weird residue of people in there. So there was two kids. It was also a brothel where we were living. And so the lady before us, Carolyn Gray Wolf, hung dead coyotes around the outside of the cabin to get them out. And she'd gotten most of them out, but there were two kids in there that were playing tricks, and they would go in and take all of the cups and dishes in the refrigerator. They'd turn everything upside
Poltergeist.
down. Yeah, yeah. It was freaky. Everything blew up in the house. Everything. Fax
Wow.
machines back in the day when we had those, computers, everything blew up.
Yeah.
And our cats, when we first brought our cats in and we rescued them from our bass player, brought them in, went to certain areas that Nancy and I always went, "Ooh, that feels weird," and hissed at the walls. So you can't tell me there isn't something else. Like, I've seen too much to say that there isn't, but like, we just don't really know 100%. You know what I mean? There's something else, and why wouldn't
Yeah.
there be? So when we do these rituals, I think it's kind of like we can, and that's what Halloween's kind of like. It's like we get to step into that dark zone, the veil, right? There's that veil of stepping out. And when people pass, there's going from the light to the dark, or the dark to the light, but they're stepping through a different dimension, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a whole other aspect to actually, there's TV shows that have been done where the ones that remain are ones who weren't ready to die or weren't accepting the fact that they were going to die. Because it doesn't seem to me that you get people who are okay with the fact that they're going to pass on. It's the people who are, excuse me, fighting and saying, "No way, I'm not leaving here."
Okay.
I wonder. It's just, I'd love to hear people call in and
Say
it,
what I want to hear, all that stuff. I mean, because it's
yeah,
fascinating to me, and I think it's fascinating to everyone else. It's like how far, and then how much is it imagination on our side too, you know?
yeah,
But like when I saw our friend literally shrink, Nancy and I both saw her at the same time do it. And we've done meditations on our ancestry and seen the same thing
yeah,
all at the same time, of crosses and stuff from our witches
yeah.
in our
And
family.
the rituals, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we were living in Philadelphia, and I remember our neighbor's father died, and part of the Jewish ritual that they went through is that they sit, I think it's Shiva, is
Mm-hmm.
and to honor him. And so there's always someone sitting and and I'd have to do my research and figure out, like, that's part of the ritual that they go through to honor the dead. And
Yeah.
family, like country people, like my mother's family, when someone passed, and there's so many cultures that do this, there was always, everybody brought food. There was always a huge meal where everybody gathered, and they would talk about the person who passed. And that seems to be common across a lot of cultures, this gathering of food and the ritual of food to honor the person who's passed. And part of
Uh-huh.
it's practical, because when you're grieving, the last thing you're thinking about is, what temperature should I set the oven for the roast? You know, it's a lot easier. That's why you get casseroles and food and everything. It's to take care of the grieving
Mm.
people.
But these rituals too. Like if you look at the Irish wake, right? When you go and see the body, the person that you love, that's kind of everybody's got a, oh yes, we must see that for closure. And these bunch of us who go, no, we don't. We don't need to see that. I want to remember the person in their youth or, at their happiest. Not
Yeah.
that isn't the last thing I want to see of someone. And
Yes.
that I'm
Yeah.
one of those. But then I'm curious too. So that's like,
Well, we've talked about the whole thing. I think it's kind of ghoulish to drain blood out of somebody and fill them with chemicals so they don't look like they're dead, like
it's
they're dead.
I
And
know.
then, and then putting makeup on them so that they look like,
Wrong
to
shade
me,
of
that's
lipstick.
foolish.
Yeah.
I just think, wrap them in a shroud and don't use, we've talked about this. Everybody knows what my viewpoints are, but those are my viewpoints. When I'm working as a doula, it's not
It's
about me. It's about
it's
the
your
other
client.
person. And so if they want that, if they want to look like,
Yeah.
like,
God, they want to look like a rock star as they go,
if they want to look like a rock star when they're put into the ground, then that's
You
what
want
you
to be a
want.
mummy. That's what you want to be
I
a
just want
mummy.
to be in a shroud and tucked into the earth, and
Or that
put a
feels good.
plant over me and make sure, like, I tell you that I will grow the best tree up above me. And I think
There
it
you go.
could be something that nourishes the world, like maybe a peach tree.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that affects the taste of peaches. Someone will have to find out.
Yeah.
I know we always have these wonderful conversations, don't
And
we?
people, are listening are going, oh,
What?
those
No,
two
but I
are
mean, but
weird.
no, but I honestly, this is nature,
Yeah.
and it's a good thing because anyway, I don't want to go in the whole biological thing because it'll freak people out, but it's a good thing what you're
Yeah.
talking about. It is a good thing. But now what about in the back in the day? I know you were mentioning before we started recording about how certain rituals got cut short because of the plague and things like that. So there's rituals around the world, but there's also been a lot of disease. So you pretty much needed to get the bodies away from the living, right? In
Yeah.
some circumstances.
Yeah. Which is why a lot of the rituals that they had prior to the plague were no longer done, just because they had to cancel those to keep the people who were still alive, keep them healthy. And so a
Yeah.
lot of those things changed. But it's interesting because I don't know if things changed drastically after COVID, because it really is like a modern day plague, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, COVID is that's a weird one because a lot of people didn't even get to see their loved ones who passed on. I know friends who lost their moms and things like that and family and weren't able to especially between Canada and America. That was one of the biggest things
Yeah.
because it's international and couldn't go back and forth, couldn't do that. And then even if your family was in a nursing home or something like that, you couldn't go in there, they couldn't go, it was just a tough time. And then if they passed on, it is weird because if you're not there for the ritual or the passing, the funeral, it is weird because I've had a lot of close people to me die. They and I wasn't able to be there for that ritual. Nancy and I both, and it's weird because you still kind of don't feel like they're gone.
Yeah.
But
And
then I
that's
kind
what
of like
happened
that too. I kind of like that
with
though.
my mother's passing, because like I said, she didn't die of COVID, but she died during COVID.
Mm,
And I was living in Savannah and she
mm,
was in Alberta.
Mm.
And I could have flown up there, but then I would have had to have isolated for 2 weeks. And they said she had a week to live. So I knew that I couldn't go up there. And then because of COVID, we couldn't have a gathering or a funeral or anything. So, I know what that feels like, because you just want
Mm.
to be able to say goodbye and have a cry, and there's no one even around to comfort you. So you don't have the
It's
relatives and
weird.
the brothers and sisters and everything to comfort you during that time. But what I'm going to do, because I don't think there is a time limit to having the ritual, I am still going to go up and get her some of her ashes and take them up and spread them on her parents' graves,
Mm.
because I know that that would be something that she would love. And then
Mm.
I'll have my own little ceremony. So I
Mm.
know that we can still do things. So even if you haven't been given the opportunity to do it, then even if it's something like going and planting a rose or doing something, and just do your own little ceremony, do your own little ritual to say goodbye
It's
to
kind
her.
of like saying it is like a putting a marker there as
Yeah,
like those main events in our lives, right? You
yeah,
know, it's I think that was hard for Nancy, like when her brother was murdered
yeah,
and all of that. So this became like a major news item across the country and around the world. Americans Most Wanted helped get the guy in Mexico because he'd fled over the border. And then we couldn't get him back into the States because he was wanted in Florida for, because he murdered people. Um, so that was a really hard, you, it, that kind of closure is not cool because you know that it's part
oh
of like a murder investigation. Autopsies are different. It's just a different thing to kind of close off and go move forward. And it took a long time. It just really took a long time. And, you know, I think what helped her going back to animals was every time she saw a hawk, that kind of there was hawks that would fly with the car. And we get this kind of weird animal stuff all the time. But this every time she would see that kind of thing and she'd go, it's Ricky. There he is. And so that was like a so whether or not it is, right? Does it matter if it makes you feel better?
yeah, it's
Yeah.
part of what you can accept to let go.
Yeah, you have to find those things. And so
Yeah,
rituals are about that. I mean, it's like if they have that burning ceremony. If have people in your life that are annoying you, you burn them on a piece of paper and send them off and say, okay, I'm done with you. It's kind of like a putting action instead of frustration, you're putting some kind of action that's positive and going, I'm clearing space, I'm
yeah,
just gonna, you know what I mean? I'm clearing space. Some people we don't want in our lives, some we do. And I'm gonna burn you on a piece of paper and say goodbye. But there's nothing wrong with that.
no,
So the funeral is the same way, but in a loving, that's a like a loving thing. You're not burning them and but the spreading of ashes, I think, is probably one of the most common rituals, wouldn't you say, for people to do? That's well, I mean, there's a typical burial, but like the spreading of
yeah.
ashes is a way you can go, I know this person loved that, you
Well,
know.
my husband said that, there's places, because between the two of us, we've traveled to a lot of places.
Mhm.
He's done more traveling than I have because of his career. And so he has been to 72 countries
Wow, that's
in
a
the
lot.
world. I'm just trying to tell him to not talk.
He's gonna tell you.
So he said that one of the things that he wants to do is leave enough money for our kids, because there's places that we want to travel to. And if we don't get there, to be
They
able
need
to
to.
say to them, okay, here's the money, take some of my ashes, sprinkle them in here. Like if we want to get to the Galapagos Islands,
Oh yeah, yeah,
well, we can still actually travel there. Hopefully we'll get there.
yeah.
But if we didn't, it'd be kind of cool to know that maybe a little bit of our ashes
We'll go there with the
there.
iguanas and the racer
Yeah.
snakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, that the Galapagos Islands. Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
So
I'll be
that'd
your
be a
kid.
ritual
No,
that we may
kidding.
do. So you give us some of yours, we'll give you, and if you're going to get there, we'll give you some of our ashes and you can
But
go.
I mean, look how many movies and stories have been written over taking someone's ashes around, and as a part of the grieving is that
Yeah.
you're doing something, having new experiences, and you have to kind of thrust yourself into change. And change is a healer, I
Yeah.
believe. You have to embrace it. And sometimes you don't want to embrace it, and it's going to embrace you, whether you like it or not. And death
Yeah.
is part of that. And I think that's what the ritual is because this is a giant shift in change. When someone is gone suddenly out of your life, your house looks different, music looks different, or sounds, everything is connected. So a shift, like the whole thing of taking someone's ashes around, gets you away from sitting and looking at the same chair where they sat every night.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So a ritual of travel and taking ashes out to me is a really healthy thing, because otherwise grief, if you're doing the same thing every day in the same routine as what was going on with the same that, in a family, that's hard, because now you're doing the same thing and you're not moving on, and you have to make a change. And so I think ritual is a way of celebrating, marking the occasion. So it's kind of like yeah, this is real, pinching yourself, right? And celebrating, honoring it, and then giving your permission, because you've basically sent off the soul, right? You're helping
Yeah.
and aiding the process in that belief system, but you're also helping your soul, like that separation. Does that make sense? I
Yeah.
won't talk about aliens again, I promise, but doesn't that sound?
So a friend of mine is a psychic, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
really cool
it is
because
cool.
some of the things that, like when she talks, she said she had to let go of some of the images she gets. People will say, well, that doesn't make sense. And she'll say, well, they don't always, she
Mm-hmm.
just talks about what she sees. But it's amazing how someone will say, they'll ask for a reading from her, and she will talk about things, and then all of a sudden she will say, okay, this doesn't make any sense to me, and she will say something, and the person goes, oh my God, my grandmother used to say that all the time, how did you know? And she
Yeah,
goes, I
that's
didn't,
what she does.
that's
Well,
just what I heard.
that's how my friend, Nancy and I were talking about the friend that kind of shrunk on the couch in our cabin. So we did a reading because, and Nancy especially is very like, yeah, right, kind of thing, right? But then she's seen some really crazy stuff, especially in Africa. I mean, we've seen things because there's also the power of the mind, right? So,
Yeah.
a lot of the shamanistic things that happen over there is like we call them sangomas in South Africa. Like there's the tokoloshi and the sangoma, and the tokoloshi is like the devil. The sangoma is like your witch doctor, basically, right? So you have your witch doctors, and a lot of what they're doing is oh, I have to watch myself. Power of the mind. Like they say, if you drink this water, you're going to choke if you're the guilty one who stole something. Well, when you go to drink the water, even if you haven't done anything, you're going to start to choke. It's like a mindset thing
Yeah.
of how they do that. So some of it's weird, but the psychic thing, I mean, our friend, she taught Nancy in a reading, and she's like, I see your brother, not your brother, she didn't know who it was. She's, I see this guy just jumping and spinning and doing all these things. Well, her brother was a champion gymnast and surfer. And that's what he did. He made gym equipment and all of that. That's what his business was. And so, I mean, who would know that? Nobody knew at that time. They
Yeah.
just, she didn't know us. We didn't know her. That's how we first met. And it, you can't really, when you go through those things, you can't really deny it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
It
wild.
was interesting. My friend was telling me that when she started the reading, she said, "Oh, I'm sorry, your grandmother just insulted me," and she said, "Why are you talking to that stupid girl?" And
Wow.
her, like the person she was doing the reading for was this woman's grandson, and she went. He said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. That's just who she is. Like that, that would be something she would say. She was a bit of
Wow.
a racist." And And she would, that is exactly what she would say. And Susan kind of, um, anyways, it was
Yeah.
kind of funny. So there's some things in the world that I don't think we can explain, and maybe they're
Mm-mm.
picking up, who knows?
Well,
Maybe
symbolism,
Nancy
right,
could
is always
explain the
this cool
practical
thing.
side of it.
Like when you look at the Day of the Dead, I mean, we did the Day of the Dead event in Tucson, and friend had lost their dog, and you go out and you take the pictures of the dogs, and then you do burn the pictures, right? Or whoever has passed on, they have this big pyre, like this dancing and like just like very it was like Mexico and Native American kind of everything. It was, Tucson is a very cool city. It's the gastronomy, UNESCO gastronomy capital of the world because of so many cultures. And it's, we love our city, Tucson. But this event, you march down and we all had the makeup on the Day of the Dead, but it was really cool to go through that experience because everything was symbolic. And then you kind of like, you step into this other zone of symbology that kind of takes you into like, oh, I understand why they do this. And then I don't
Yeah,
know, you're being, it's like being in a guided meditation in a weird way. So you're all parading, you're carrying your loved ones in pictures, and then you take them and then they just start burning everything, which is this cool thing.
releasing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
It is
release.
interesting how fire is in so many cultures, it's a release.
Yes. Yeah. So well, in India, like we talked about, New Mexico, they have in Santa Fe, they have what's called zozobra. And it's this huge dude that they create and they burn him. And people from all over the world send them things to stuff in him because it's like, I want to burn, like if I have cancer, I'm going to put my cancer in there and it's going to burn and take it away. Or I've got a family member who's sick. Or so it's taking the ill of the world and burning it away.
Even Burning Man, I mean, which is when they have that at the end of it, it's called Burning Man because they always have a huge symbolic wooden man that at the end of it, everybody who has been there for the whole festival takes all of the things, all of their cares, all of their problems, all of the wishes and everything, and they put
Mhm.
it, they take it to the Burning Man and it's burned and released.
Well, Susan
So,
Sarandon drank Timothy Leary's ashes in wine while she was there at Burning Man one year.
okay, ooh.
Just I'm keeping with the Halloween theme here. just I just had to bring that up because every time someone says Burning Man, I'm like, did you know she did this? I was some
Yeah.
talk show she was talking about it. I'm like, why would you want to? I mean, that's not a ritual I would enjoy is drinking someone's ashes.
No, no, I'm thinking, um,
I mean, did she get
a
high from
strange
doing this? Did
aftertaste. Does it
acid keep
go
going
well
through?
with cheese? I don't know.
No, I don't know, but on the desert and drinking wine with someone's ashes, I don't care who it is.
Yeah,
That,
yeah,
but
not good.
hey, she was in the
Anyway,
Rocky Horror Picture Show, so we could give her,
well, that's
some
true.
grace on that when we talk about, this time of year. But I find it interesting the makeup, marigolds and plants. Certain plants mean certain things. I think it's cool because it just is kind of like giving our it's like putting our emotions into these different things so we're not carrying the load of grief. That's part of it, I think, what it is.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
and letting
cool.
it go. So it,
That's the
I
fire,
was
yeah.
reading a great book the other day, and they talked about allowing things to bend you and not make you brittle. So we
Mm,
can bend and we can change and evolve. And
mm.
if we don't, if we try and stay too stiff and not
Oh,
allow
we'll break.
that emotion to come through us, makes us brittle, and brittle
Hmm.
people are not pleasant to be around. So I think the whole ritual thing is to allow us to release it and to be able to move on and to be able to bend and
Hmm.
shape to a new reality instead of holding all that grief in and making us brittle.
It's like when you do a garden, and you've got your animals in there and maybe something representing a family member, like it's a memorial garden. I think it allows you to tend to that. There's something beautiful about that ritual. of a
Yeah.
memorial garden where you're tending to the garden. I mean, obviously you're going to have a memorial garden with peaches, but that means that someone's tending.
Yeah.
So it's like this, because energy never dies. It really embraces that. And it's a place where people can go and meditate and reflect on their loved ones. I think there's something, and that's why I like cemetery. I love cemeteries and graveyards. Oh my gosh, they're one of the best places to go bird watching
Yeah.
because it's quiet. And you just, there is a vibe. I can't explain that, man.
So when you come to Halifax, you'll have to, I'll take you to the Halifax, kind of in the main, like right downtown. And it's where a lot of the victims of the Titanic were buried,
Oh,
because
that's right.
Halifax
Yeah.
was one of the closest cities. And so there's a lot of it's cool to walk through, because
Hmm.
you see all of the names of people. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, um, what was the name of the character that Leonardo DiCaprio played in Titanic? Because they
Cute
got
guy.
a name. What's that?
Cute guy at that time. Yes. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
I can't
Um,
remember.
I think they got the name off of one of the gravestones in
Oh,
Halifax,
wow.
which is kind of cool. I mean, a lot of that character was fictitious, but
Mm.
that person really lived at one point.
Man, our fascination with the Titanic never ends, does it? Like the civilization is fascinated by the Titanic story. It's
Yeah.
we used to play Titanic in our cabin. That one I was telling you about that was haunted. After we do our shows we used to, perform and everything. So we had a violin player, and then my friend and I, we both could play guitar and sing and everything. And so we would go to our cabin because it was slanted, because it wasn't from the 1800s. I mean, it still had the original glass and everything, which was it was so cool. Had a Murphy bed and everything, but no bed, but the fold downs. It
Yeah.
the original hardwood floors, all of it, but it's kind of slanted because you're on a mountain. And so Joe would start playing the violin, and Nancy would flick the lights on and off. So we're like, we're playing the Titanic. We're going down. We're never going to die. We're the best band on just crazy stuff. But yeah, come on, it's fun. But there's something
Yeah.
about that. But the cemetery, Savannah, you guys have some good graveyards out there.
Oh,
I'm gonna
yeah.
have to check that because that is, I mean,
We loved walking through those too. I mean, there's beautiful headstones and a whole different, different sections. There's a whole section just for train conductors. It's a
mm,
conductor's graveyard. And then there's some of the gravestones and tombs are absolutely beautiful and so historical. And you find out, I'm trying to think of musicians who are buried there that you'd find
mhm,
really interesting. So yeah.
yeah. No, cemeteries are fantastic. We go to them as much as we can. Little Rock, they have Mount Holly Cemetery, Little Rock, Arkansas, and they have like the politicians and the prostitutes buried next to each other, basically. It didn't matter who was who. It was just like, that's the next open spot. There you go. So it wasn't like, here's the la-di-da people, here's that. It was just like, yeah, politicians and prostitutes together. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Just
I think
saying,
so
just
too.
saying.
Well,
Oh,
always
awesome. It's,
fun to talk to you,
I
Nancy.
know we always go down rabbit
Lisa.
holes here.
Called you your mother's name. You know that, right? I just
Huh?
called you Nancy. I just called you Nancy.
People call me Nancy all the time.
Wow.
Well,
But I've never done
then
that
you
before.
must think I'm smart or something.
Well,
You know,
apple didn't fall far from the tree.
I
So,
people call me Nancy all the time. I'm like, yeah, I know, it's okay. That's cool. You know,
well,
I got
say
some,
hi to her for me.
I will. She always says hi to you. And you guys take care, everyone. We can't wait. November's coming up, and we'll find something really interesting to talk about then. But
So,
talking rituals is good. That's really good. You take care, Lee. Thank you. Everyone, keep up with us every third Thursday.
thanks, Lisa.